The posting at Morrow Light paid better than it should have, and I knew it when I signed the contract. Not extravagantly better. Not obviously, suspiciously better. Just slightly more than the work warranted, slightly more than comparable postings at other stations along the coast. In the way that a house sometimes sells slightly below market value, and the buyer doesn't ask why until they're already moved in, and it's too late to ask. Anything that matters, I asked anyway. During the interview, the man across the desk, regional coordinator for the Coastal Authority, reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead, coffee going cold at his elbow, told me the premium was for remoteness and weather conditions. Morrow Light sat on a shelf of rock 2 kilometers off the coast, accessible only by boat. And the weather in that part of the coast between October and March was, he said, challenging. I asked about the previous keeper. He looked at his coffee. Resigned, he said. Personal reasons. Before him? A pause, slightly too long. Also resigned. I took the posting anyway. I was 34, recently out of a long relationship that had ended badly enough that I needed somewhere without mutual friends or shared restaurants or streets that held memories like damp holes cold. I needed somewhere I couldn't be reached easily. Somewhere the silence would be a feature rather than a symptom. Morrow Light was all of those things, and for the first 3 weeks, I was grateful for every one of them. The lighthouse itself was older than the automated equipment inside it. A stone tower built in the previous century, thick-walled and cold, in the way that very old stone is cold, retaining the memory of winter long after the season has passed. My living quarters were in the attached keeper's cottage, 2 rooms and a small kitchen, heated by an electric unit that worked inconsistently and a wood stove that worked very well once. I'd learned its particular requirements. The light itself ran automatically, needing only monitoring and occasional maintenance. My official duties were minimal. Log weather observations every 6 hours, maintain equipment, report anything unusual on the radio to the mainland station. The radio worked. I checked. What I hadn't been told, and what I discovered on my 4th night, was that the previous keeper had left things behind, not personal items. The cottage had been cleared of those. What he'd left were notes. Small ones, written on scraps of whatever had been available, torn margins of logbook pages, the backs of equipment receipts, once the inside of a matchbook cover, tucked into spaces that only became apparent when you knew to look, behind the wood stove, under the lip of the kitchen counter, inside the cover of the maintenance manual, folded small and pressed flat against the binding. I found the first one by accident, reaching behind the stove to adjust a cable. It read in handwriting that started neat and became increasingly compressed as it went on, as if the writer was rationing space. The sound is not the sea. I have lived near the sea my whole life. This is not that sound. I held it for a long time. Then I did what I imagine most people would do, alone on a rock in the sea with a note in their hand. I told myself it was nothing. A previous keeper processing a bad winter through dramatic scribbling. Isolation does things to people. I knew that. I found the second note 2 days later, under the kitchen counter near the back wall, where the baseboard had come slightly loose. This one was longer, denser, the handwriting already less careful than the first. It comes with the tide. Not every tide. I have been watching the pattern for 6 weeks, and I cannot make sense of it. It is not the spring tides. It is not the neap tides. It seems to come when the water is between states, neither fully in nor fully out, as if whatever produces it requires that ambiguity, as if it needs the sea to not quite be itself. I read this one 3 times. Then I went outside and stood on the rock shelf and listened to the sea in the gray afternoon light, and the sea sounded like the sea, cold and rhythmic and entirely indifferent to me. I went back inside and started looking for more notes. I found 7 in total over the following week, working through the cottage and the base of the tower methodically, checking every loose fitting and gap and recess I could find. I laid them out on the kitchen table in the order I believed they'd been written, based on the progressive deterioration of the handwriting and the increasingly urgent quality of the content. The 3rd note. I recorded it on my phone last night. Listened back this morning. The recording contains nothing unusual, only the sea. This is not a comfort. The 4th, I have started to believe it knows I can hear it. This is not rational. I am writing it down anyway because the alternative is to keep thinking it without writing it down, and that seems worse somehow. The 5th, the handwriting beginning to slope. It is under the rock. I don't mean this as a guess. I mean I have stood at the edge of the shelf at low tide and felt it through the stone, through the soles of my boots, a vibration that isn't the sea because the sea moves differently. The sea is irregular, and this is not irregular. This is patient. This is something that has been doing this for so long that it has become perfectly regular, like a heartbeat, like a clock, like something that has been counting time in a way that has nothing to do with our calendar. The 6th note was the hardest to read, partly because the handwriting had deteriorated significantly, and partly because of what it said. I saw something in the water last night during the turn of the tide. I was watching from the lantern room because I had stopped being able to sleep during the between tides hours. I cannot describe the shape accurately because I am not sure my eyes were processing it the way eyes are supposed to process things. I will say that it was large. I will say that it did not move the way things that live in water move. I will say that after I saw it, I went downstairs and sat against the wall furthest from the sea and did not move until full morning. Asterisk, the 7th note was 3 words. Don't listen back. I sat with these notes for the better part of an evening. Then I made a decision that I now understand was not entirely my own decision. In the same way that a person standing too close to a cliff edge doesn't entirely decide to look down, I started listening, not with equipment, just with attention, the kind of full-body attention you develop when you're alone in a place where the sounds matter, where a change in the weather or a problem with the light needs to be caught early. I started sitting by the window in the between tides hours, the ambiguous periods when the water was neither fully in nor fully out, and I listened. For the first week, I heard nothing unusual, just the sea. On the 9th night of listening, I heard it. I want to be precise about this. I am aware that what I'm about to describe could be attributed to sleep deprivation, to the particular way that extended isolation affects perception, to the very human tendency to find patterns in noise and then hear them again and again once you've noticed them. I have considered all of these explanations. I have considered them extensively and with genuine willingness to accept any of them. I cannot accept them because what I heard that night was not a pattern I imposed on random noise. It was a pattern that imposed itself on me, that worked its way into my attention, and then into my chest, and then into something lower and more animal than either. A frequency that my body recognized before my brain had finished processing that it was hearing anything at all. It was below the sound of the sea, not under it in the spatial sense, not coming from beneath the water, but below it in the way a bass note is below the melody of a piece of music, foundational, structural, the thing the rest of the sound was built on top of. And the previous keeper had been right. It was not irregular. It was perfectly, impossibly regular. Patient in a way that natural sounds are not patient. Patient in a way that implies a mind behind the patience, a decision to wait, a knowledge that waiting will eventually be sufficient. I did not record it. I sat by the window until the tide turned, and the sound faded back into the ordinary sea. And then I went to bed and lay awake until dawn, and in the morning I went to the radio and considered calling the mainland station. I didn't. I'm still not entirely sure why. The closest I can get to an explanation is that whatever I'd heard the night before had not felt threatening exactly. It had felt aware, and something about the idea of making noise about it, drawing attention to my awareness of it, seemed inadvisable in a way I couldn't articulate. Instead, I kept listening. For 2 more weeks, every between tides period, I sat by the window and listened, and the sound was there every time, without exception. And I began to understand what the previous keeper had meant about the pattern. It was not the spring tides or the neap tides. It was the liminal moments, specifically the ambiguous water. And as I sat with this knowledge, I began to develop a theory that I wrote in my own logbook in the margins, in small handwriting, because the previous keeper's habit had apparently become my own dot. My theory was this: whatever was producing the sound had been there for a very long time. Long enough that the rock we'd built the lighthouse on had been selected, consciously or otherwise, to sit directly above it. Long enough that the history of the light itself, the keepers who'd come and stayed briefly and left, was just a recent chapter of something it had been witnessing for centuries. And it was not malevolent exactly. It was interested, in the way that something very old and very patient and very different from us might be interested in the brief, warm, temporary things that had started appearing on the rock above it and then disappearing again, one after another, decade after decade. The last week of my posting, I saw it. I won't attempt a full description. Some things resist description, not because language lacks the words, but because the words exist for shapes and movements that belong to the world of surfaces. And what I saw that night in the between tides dark was not entirely a surface thing. It was partly below and partly above, and partly neither, occupying the threshold between water and air the way the sound occupied the threshold between the tides. And it was large in a way that made the word large seem like an understatement I was using because the accurate words haven't been invented yet. It did not approach the rock. It moved alongside it, slowly, at a distance that felt considered rather than cautious, as if it was choosing to remain at that distance rather than being limited to it. And then it paused in the water below the shelf, and I had the very clear, very specific sensation that I have been unable to argue myself out of in the months since. that it paused because it knew I was watching, and that it stayed at that distance, and moved that slowly and did not approach the rock. For the same reason I had not called the mainland when I heard the sound, because drawing attention to the awareness seemed inadvisable. We watched each other across the dark water for what my phone later told me was 11 minutes. Then the tide turned and it was gone, and the sea was just the sea again. I completed my posting, logged my observations, maintained my equipment, reported nothing unusual to the mainland station. When my replacement arrived by boat 3 weeks later, I helped him carry his gear to the cottage and showed him the heating system and the idiosyncrasies of the wood stove. I did not tell him about the notes. I found them where I'd left them on the kitchen table and put them in my bag. I did not tell him about the sound, or the theory I'd developed about the liminal tides, or what I'd seen on the last week of my posting. I did not leave any notes of my own. I have thought about this decision many times since, more times than I can count accurately. It tends to surface at specific moments, on quiet evenings when the ambient sound of wherever I'm living drops below a certain threshold, or when I pass a body of water at dusk, or when I wake at 3 in the morning from a dream I can't quite hold on to, but that leaves the specific sensation of cold stone under my feet and the sound of the sea below, and something beneath the sea below that dot. What I keep coming back to is this: the notes didn't help the keeper who left them. They didn't help me. They documented something that couldn't be acted on and couldn't be confirmed and couldn't be shared with anyone who wasn't already standing on that rock in the between tides dark, listening with the particular attention that the place seems to require. But I've also thought about the things the notes did. They told me I wasn't the first, that whatever I was experiencing had a history, had been experienced before by someone sufficiently intact to write about it, which meant that experiencing it didn't immediately destroy you. That was not nothing. In the worst of the between tides nights, that was considerably more than nothing. They told me the pattern, not fully, not completely, but enough that I could orient myself around it, could structure my days around the tidal rhythms in a way that gave me some feeling of agency, even when agency felt like the most theoretical concept imaginable. And the last one, the 3 words, told me something I might not have understood without the preceding 6. It said, "Don't listen back," which told me that the previous keeper had listened back, had recorded the sound and played it again in daylight when it should have been safe, and found that whatever the sound carried with it did not stay behind when the tide turned, that it traveled, that it persisted in recording in a way it didn't persist in the air. I have not played back anything I recorded at Morrow Light. I recorded very little, but the few clips I have on my phone from that posting, weather observations, a test of the radio signal, 30 seconds of the sea on a calm afternoon, I have not listened to any of them. Probably never will. My replacement's name was Thomas. I found this out from the Coastal Authority paperwork during the handover. He was young, cheerful, in the way that people are cheerful before places had time to work on them. He made a joke about finally getting some peace and quiet as the supply boat pulled away. I tried to smile back. I think I managed something close. I found out 6 months later from the woman at the Coastal Authority Records Office who had answered my research calls with such patience. that Thomas had resigned from his posting after 11 days. She didn't elaborate. I didn't ask her to dot 11 days. I've done the math. That's long enough to find the notes. Long enough for 2 or 3 between tides periods, if the timing was right. Not long enough, I think, to hear the sound more than once or twice. Not long enough to see anything? I hope not long enough to see anything. If you are reading this somewhere dry and well lit and far from the sea, the notes mean nothing. If you are reading this on a shelf of rock 2 kilometers off the coast, in the hours when the water is neither fully in nor fully out, and there's a sound below the sound of the sea that your body recognized before your mind did, you already know what the notes mean. You've already heard it. Don't listen back. And if the posting is still open, if there is still a position available at moral light paying, slightly more than it should for remoteness, and weather conditions, there is a reason it keeps becoming. Available dot, there is a reason it will. Always keep becoming available dot, the boat comes on Thursdays. Leave before the last week. Take the notes with you if you find them. Don't leave your own.